So one of the last great major sugyas here in Masechet Sotah, as we come towards the finale, is Eglah Arufa, correct? And Eglah Arufa is a massive sugya that appears all over Shas, but we get a little bit of a picture of it here in Masechet Sotah. Now, what I would like to do is, if we have possibly just even a regular chumash to just look at the psukim inside, because that would be helpful.
Pick up in the other room, right? Ones here, the ones here are like
there are none here.
Per page.
Okay. And the first part of Eglah Arufa is Medida, and the Gemara goes into detail. How do we darshan? How many members of the Sanhedrin Agdola have to represent the Sanhedrin in the Medida? Oh, thank you so much. Wow, this is really top notch here. Okay. You mind, Daniel, just opening it up for me just to save me a second? Thanks. So again, we're talking about Dvarim Perek Chaf Aleph here. That's it, right? And the Torah says, Ki yimtza cholol ba'adama. Let's just see where.
On the right side.
Okay, on the right side. I don't want to read the Psukim Baal Peh because I'll definitely mess up. Yeah. So it's Pasuk Aleph, actually. Ki matzei cholol ba'adama. Okay, there's a whole discussion what ba'adama means. It's got to be, sort of on the ground, but not below the ground. It's got to be, visible, but not invisible. So it's only in Eretz Yisrael. Now here, there's a whole long sugya about what status of Eretz Yisrael are we talking about. Are we talking about Kedushas Eretz Yisrael? Like, for example, let's say areas that were conquered by Oli Mitzrayim, but not by Oli Bavel, or you have, let's say, Eivra Yarden. In other words, what exactly is Larishta? Larishta seems to assume that it's what's called in the Brisker terminology, if you're familiar with this, the Shem Eretz Yisrael as opposed to Kedushas Eretz Yisrael. So there are areas that are extensions of Eretz Yisrael, but they don't have Kedushas Eretz Yisrael because we need an act of Kiddush, like, for example, Yoshua conquers Eretz Yisrael, and that kibush sanctifies Eretz Yisrael, and that's for Trumas and Maisras and Mitzvah Tluyas Baaretz. Or, for example, in the case of Ezra, the Rambam is very famous in the last chapter in Hilchos Beis Bechira that it's the Yishuv, the Chazaka itself of living in Eretz Yisrael, that sanctifies the land. And that's assuming, let's say, Kiddush Rishona, Kiddush Shaitiv Lo Kiddush Lasalova, but the second Kiddush of Ezra was Mekadosh Eretz Yisrael. But now we're not talking necessarily about Kedushas Eretz Yisrael, so that even if you have areas like Meivra Yarden that don't have Kedushas Eretz Yisrael, but nevertheless they're part of the areas that were given to Avram Avinu and promised, like Eretz Kiniu, Prizi, the areas that will be extended borders that aren't included in Kibush or in Chazaka, and that's enough for Eglah Arufa, because it's all dependent on Larishta. Okay, now it says, V'lo noda mihi ko, which means that if we can identify the murderer, then there's no Eglah Arufa. The din or the mitzvah of Eglah Arufa doesn't apply if we can identify the murderer. And that means that even if somewhere on the face of the earth there's someone who knows who the murderer is, because it says lo noda, it's not known. But if it's known to even one person on the end of the earth, then there's no mitzvah of Eglah Arufa. Now, v'yotzus keinecha v'shovtechu modadu. So now we have stage number one in the process of Eglah Arufa, that's called Medida, correct? And again, exactly how many members of the Sanhedrin have to be there for Medida, that will be a subject of the Machlokas Tanoim. For example, it might be 3, it might be 5. So I have here a piece, maybe Tzvi, you would not mind Afinar taking a picture of it, if you don't mind. So we'll all have it in front of us, and I apologize. Here, I'll give this to you. Take it to you. Just let's say these 2
I want to see
pages.
the technique. I don't see the
Right. I have to learn the
strategy.
technique too.
The lighting. How do you do
Now, Rabosai, give me a simple, what I call a knee-jerk response to the question: what is Medida? What's the purpose of Medida?
The Hechitimsi to figure out
Which city is
not-
Which city is closest to?
In the sense that most time you probably wouldn't need to measure.
Correct. In
It's
most
pretty obvious
cases,
where
like
we are.
for example, let's say we find the slain body within the bounds of the city. We know it's coming from this city. And we're going to have a tremendous machlokus, which I want you to look at here in these pages, as to whether or not there's a mitzvah medida, even if we know exactly which is the closest city. And there's some Rishonim and even Achronim who are going to argue that the mitzvah medida is an absolute mitzvah. When I say absolute, I mean it has a meaning unto itself. It's an end unto itself. It's required by the Torah through Gzeres HaKasuv. Even if liyitzu, we know exactly which is the closest city.
2 pages.
I think for now, 2 pages should suffice, I hope. And then we get into another issue here. How do we know it's not 2 judges? How do we know it's not 4 judges? And the Gemara says, because we need a Bezdin Nota and not a Bezdin Shakur. But then the Rishonim all ask the following question. We're talking about a Medida. A Medida is not something that requires judgment, requires a horah, requires a decision. And we could suggest and suspect that maybe there'll be dissenting opinions, and we need.
No, for sure. There'll be. Where do we start? Where do we measure from? For sure, going to be disputes.
Okay.
Yeah, that's exactly what Beit Din required for. Where does the city end?
Rabbi.
Is it here? Is it here? It starts with.
So this I can take back, this Gemara? Yeah. Thanks, Tzvi.
Yeah, Don, we're live.
Numbers on Daf Yomi.
Tzvi, just to tell you how dependent I am. Yesterday, I had such a problem with the Shomi Nothing. They didn't have Shomi Nothing.
I sent it, so.
Yeah, I know, but it was too late to have the photocopy. Whatever, it doesn't matter. It was. It's all a matter of how do we say communication, right? The real estate agents say location, 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 but we know that more important than location is communication, right?
Yeah, but basically it's timing.
And timing, right? So if you take a look here on the pages that Reb Tzvi just sent you, you see page Ayin and then page Ayin Aleph, yeah?
Yeah.
So you'll see on page Ayin, in the first chapter here called Mitzvahs Medida, and he quotes the Mishnah on Daf Mem Daled Amud Beis, that in turn, based on the Pasuk Motzei, and quotes the 2 Shitos, exactly how many members of the Sanhedrin will have to be involved in the Medida. The Tanna Kama will say 3, and Rabbi Yehuda will say 5. Good? That's the first paragraph. Then in the second paragraph, or shall I say the third paragraph, Yesh Ladun. Do you have that on the left side? Yesh Ladun. He says, what is the reason for Medida? And why do we need a Bezdin that is Eno Shakel, right? A Bezdin Anota, not a Bezdin Shakel. So on the 4th line or 5th line of that paragraph, he quotes a Tosas in Yevamos Kuf Aleph. And Tosas has 2 answers to a kash over there. And it's basically a machlokis on this fundamental point about what is the purpose and the goal of Medida. According to one answer in Tosfos, it's a Medida that could be asli lemachlokis. In other words, the reason why we need an odd number of representatives of the High Court is because asuyin lemachlokis. Okay, we'll see what that means. Asuyin lemachlokis.
But dafka, so I mean, not every case, only the cases that are
correct. And he's going to try to explain why this medida is asli lemachlokis. And tirit sheni sovishim kol makom. It's not conditional on asli lemachlokis, even if there's no asli lemachlokis. We don't even suspect or imagine that there'll be a machlokis. Nevertheless, we need a bezdin she'eno shakel, a bezdin anota, which means it's a Chal Hashem in what? In bezdin, right? The Chal Hashem bezdin is conditional on the fact that you have an odd number of members of the court. And therefore, you don't even need asli lemachlokes in order to justify the requirement of a bezdin anota. And later on, I just want to show you where in this essay. Okay, we'll get back to this in a minute, but if you look on page Ayin Aleph, right, you'll see that Nisbar Besugya Seinu, that's about the fourth paragraph, the third paragraph down from the top, that Afilu Nimsa Ba'olil Le'ir, so we know exactly where the closest city is. It might even be that we found the slain body in the city, and yet we need a Medida. So we have Machlokas Rishonim and Achronim begeder din ze haim dafka kasher yesh tam lemedida mishum she'eno nikar el lefi umdin das. Okay, we can sort of shots up. We can evaluate which is the closest city. Kedei lahosif ulevar, we still need to get from level of umdina to a level of birur vivados, and therefore we need medida. Or perhaps gam kasher ein tam b'medida, there's an absolute gzeres hakos of unconditional requirement of a chiyuv medida. So medida is not just an instrument or a means to an end, but it is a mitzvah and a chiyuv unto itself. And in the rest of this essay, he goes through the various shitos. Like, for example, if you see a paragraph that says nimtza on the right column on page Ayin Aleph, yes? Yesh kan machlokas haber sheva sover shebechol inyan, unconditionally, absolutely tzarech limda. But the Mizrahi and the Panim Yafos, they hold that shakurva brura, if we know clearly bevadaut which is the closest city, ein tzarech limedida, which means that medida is only, I think you use the term hechetimcha. I think that's a good word. It's a way, it's a means of determining which is the closest city.
But Arufa makes sense that the whole it's a tekes, right? They're not trying to figure out the murderer. You could imagine the basin plays a symbolic a role to make a statement. Medida,
well, I would say the following, and this is going to our subject for today is going to be kapara, and if the purpose of Eglah Arufa, of the Arifas Eglah, is to achieve kapara, we got to know which city is guilty that needs this kapara. So then, which is the closest city? The Torah says that the closest city is the city that, in all likelihood, that's where the Ritzicha came from. I mean, I don't know if the Rotzeach came from the city or the Nirtzach came from the city, but I would say that Pashtus, and he quotes this in the name of the Mizrahi, that if we know which is the closest city, and we know which city needs the kapara of the Eglah Arufa, there's no need for Medida, and yet the Torah opens up this parsha by saying, Ki motzei chol b'adama, v'lo nodel mi hiko, is v'yatzus kenech v'shovtechu madadu. And it's a separate, independent mitzvah Medida. But in terms of whether or not we need a Bezdin Noteh, because there really is a good chance that it's Osui. What was the language that he used? Osui lachria, meaning we need a machloket. We might anticipate a machlokes. So take a look at a paragraph on the previous page, that's Ayin, that starts with the word vehine. He says, Bevadai, Shegam Linya Medida Tzarch Bezdin Noteh V'lo Shokul. He says, "He tochin shadin shamedida te'osa yidei zakenim enerak mishum shemaisa medida yel yodam." It's not just halach in the maisa medida, but there's a function here of bezdin. For example, Rabosa, you remember that very often we distinguish in bezdin between two different concepts. One is called lebir hadavar, and one is called lekiyum hadavar. I mean, the classic case is in Edus, right? We have Edus L'Kiyum Hadavar. So, for example, if two witnesses saw Ruvain being Makadish Leah, so the Gemara establishes in Kiddushin, on Daf Samach Vav, I believe, that she's not married. Why? Even though as far as Birur is concerned, the two Eidim who saw through the window could certainly clarify Areyat Mekudeshesli, but nevertheless, that's not Eidei Kiyum. Eidei Kiyum have to be brought in to create a chalos. And therefore, he and she have to bring the Eidim. Some even have a minhag that the Chassan should be mamana the Eidim. He should say, Atem Eidai, and that's Eidus L'Kiyum Adover. And similarly, in Bezdin, you could have Bezdin functioning to be Mavarer, right? They're the ultimate clarifiers of what happened based on their interrogation and so forth and so on. But sometimes Bezdin plays a role of Kiyum Hadover. Bezdin actually is a T'nai in the Chalos. For example, in Gerus, right? The Bezdin, if there is a requirement of Bezdin at all in Gerus, but assuming there is, then Bezdin is creating the Gerus, or maybe in Hataras Nidarim, there might be a creation of a heter, and so forth. Many different. You have to learn the beginning of Masechet Sanhedrin. So, if that be the case, how do we understand the role of Bezdin in Medida?
If it's just a beer and it's only just for effect, why do you need the whole pasuk? Like the whole pasuk is extra then, right? If you just read it, right? You could skip if it were just simply a matter of knowing which is the closest city. If you say it's the closest city needs to do it because it came to the closest city, then you would know. You got to figure out which one it is. But the fact it's a whole other pasuk implies.
Well, which pasuk are you referring to that seems to be the purpose? For Yotzes Keinecha, that pasuk? So who's going to determine which is the closest city? And that's a bir l'dava. So we need Bezdin under certain circumstances. To clarify which is the closest city. And the Torah doesn't want to rely on any other supervision. That's what he writes over here. He says, in other words, Bezdin is going to make a decision, and only the decision of Bezdin will be valid, will be takef, to decide and determine which is the city that's closest to effectuate the mitzvah of Eglah Arufa. But then he's going with Hashgacha Vaskamas Bezdin, which seems to be that Bezdin is going to really have to make some sort of serious attempt at shikul and decide which is the closest city, and there may be dissenters. As Daniel said before, there might be an inner controversy as to which is the closest, how to do the medida. The Gemara is going to have all sorts of sfekas, like you have one body on top of the other, and do you go by the head or you go by the feet? You know what I'm talking about. That there are many different issues here. That's what he's saying here. But then he says, Hakol Modu Shetzarach Bezdin Aroy Lachra. Now he's saying that no, it's not because of the supervision of Bezdin. V'nafgemina im yeh vikuach bein hadayanim, yeh hadover muchral piro. So therefore, according to one teretz in Tosas and Yevamis that we said before, it's asui l'machlokas. And if it's asui l'machlokas, and in every machlokas we need a hachra. And if we need a hachra, we need a bezdin that's roy lachra, which we need a bezdin nota. But we have the second teretz in Tosas. He says, you know what? I don't need roy lachra. I know that bezdin is going to establish that city. What do I mean by establish? That's what I call kiyum l'dov. That the Torah says that bezdin are part and parcel of the process of establishing the Chal Shem Ir. What is the Chal Shem Ir? Ir hakrova legufa shel mes. Now, let me ask you another question here. Does bezdin have any? Let me say it this way: do bezdin share, to any extent, the responsibility for the death of this slain person? What would be your knee-jerk response? No, absolutely not. What? Who cares about bezdin? Is sitting in the Lishkas Hagazis in Yerushalayim.
Well, you have local leadership and you have national leadership.
So it could be that national leadership is not relevant. What's relevant is the leadership of the city. That's what the Torah emphasizes here, Ziknei Ha'ir. And if you take a look at when we get to the second stage in Eglah Arufa, we've already established the Medida. Bezdin, either through a process of clarification, what we call birur, or a process of kiyum l'davar, and we need a Bezdin Nota in order to have a Chal Shem Bezdin that are capable of establishing a Chal Shem Ir Akrova. Now we're ready for stage number 2. V'horidu, and now again the Torah used the word Zikenim, but now it's Ziknei Ir. Now again, it's in the initial pasuk, it says V'yatzu Zkeinecha. That's already the Zkenim who sit on the high court of Israel. They represent the entire Klal Yisrael. But I wouldn't say that Klal Yisrael as a whole needs kapara if that's the purpose of Eglah Arufa, and therefore we have to focus on the city. So the purpose and the function of the Bezdin Gadol is only to begin the process of Eglah Arufa by establishing the city. Once we establish the city, now we zone in on the city, and the city itself is responsible. So there's a leadership of the city. Who are the leaders of the city that are responsible? The Ziknei Ha'ir of that city. Now, I don't know, again, who the Ziknei Ha'ir are, and that's what we're going to discuss in 5 minutes from now. Is it the Bezdin Shebe'ir? Every city in Israel is equipped with its own Bezdin, and if it's not equipped with a Bezdin, then there's no responsibility of the city at all. So it's the Bezdin that's responsible to supervise and make sure that this whole situation didn't occur. Or is it the Ziknei Ha'ir, the Zkenim themselves, that are responsible, even if they're not sitting on the Bezdin? So we only need the Bezdin in the city to establish that this is an Ir Sheyesh Ba Bezdin. So we have 2 conditions in Eglah Arufa as far as the Ir is concerned. Condition number 1, it's got to be the Ir HaKrova, and that will be accomplished by the Bezdin Gadol through Medina. And now we have another condition. It's got to be not only an Ir HaKrova, but an Ir Sheyesh Ba Bezdin. Why? Because the Bezdin, in some sense, is inadvertently, perhaps, responsible for what happened. And if that's the case, then the kapara of the Eglah Arufa is going to be engendered by that responsibility that they didn't live up to their responsibility, and that would be the Bezdin. Then I'm going to ask you the following question. What about those who don't sit on the Bezdin, which means the Ziknei Ha'ir, or the city themselves? What about the members of the city? Are they also, to some extent, responsible? And that we're going to see in Mirz Hashem as we go along. But I just want to point out the Avidram on page Ayin Al.
Suggest something, I think, along the lines of what Yomi was hinting to, that when you read the Psukim, it's very possible that the Medida has nothing to do with the next pasuk. Normally, the Torah tells us that certain halacha that applies to a Bechor. Torah doesn't tell us that we have to tell us the way we figure out which baby was born first. I think certain things are just obvious. The Torah doesn't need to tell us how to calculate them. Here,
and we certainly don't need a Bezdin for that.
Right. So here it's very possible, and there's machlokas amongst the Mefarshim, what the purpose of the Medida is. It might have nothing to do with figuring out which city's closest. Could be the Medida is we go and there are 5 cities around, and we go measure to each of the 5 cities, even ones we know for sure are not the closest, but they're the ones that surround, and it's very likely someone from one of those cities sees what's going on. Now we can figure out who the murderer is. And that's what some of the Mefarshim
you want to say that the person with deed is sort of like to send out a call,
exactly,
so that maybe somebody will come forward and identify the murder.
The Chizkuni says that explicitly. He says that the reason for the Medida is for Avsha.
So open that up, and maybe, if you don't mind, just read. You don't have to read the whole Chizkuni, but maybe that one line, because this is something that I was unaware of.
Right. Afilu nimtza ba'alu mitzvah la'asok b'medida shemitoch kach yeh avsha b'davar v'yavo mitoch ha'arim hanimdados. But
what was the first line again before you get the option?
We know.
Oh, we know exactly where the body is, and which is the closest city.
Right. Mitzvah lasok b'medida shemitoch kach yeh avsha. And then all the cities that get measured, people will come and they'll say, "Oh, who's not here?" And they'll start realizing maybe.
So then, perhaps, according to Chizkuni, we should come to the conclusion that perhaps the Medida is l'kiyum adover, because we're not even determining at this point.
But it's not a kiyum of which is the closest city.
Right.
It's a kiyum of Medida.
Right.
A total.
But I'm just saying that there,
right,
a standalone. That's what I want to know.
Yeah.
And now I wanted to ask you the next question: is there a bracha on Medida? Because we start with Medida, correct? That it says Umadu es ha'arim, and then we go on to say that v'lakhu ziknei ha'ir eglas baka, which is what's called harada l'nachal. So we're going to have another possibility of a bracha on harada l'nachal, and maybe the Medida is only an introduction, what we might call a hechsher mitzvah, but it's not gufa shel mitzvah.
The Horadal Nachal can also be a hechsher mitzvah.
Excellent. Maybe the whole rada doesn't need a bracha. So that's the subject of this Avudraham that I wanted to show you, which I thought was fascinating, on page Ayin Aleph. B'Shema Ravid, which is very interesting. The Avudraham lived about 6 centuries ago. The Ravid lived about 9 centuries ago. So I don't know exactly how the transmission was, but in any event, Sherak al Harifa mevarchim. In other words, there are 3 parts to Eglah Arufa. There's Medida, and then there's Horada, and then there's Arifa. And which of the 3 require a bracha? Says the Ravid, the Arifa requires a bracha. Which would, I think, imply, and tell me if you agree with me, that the Medida and the Horada are just Begeder Hechsher mitzvah. They're just preparatory stages for the mitzvah. The Gufa mitzvah is the Arifa itself. And especially in light of the fact that the purpose and the goal of the Arifa is kapara, the kapara is going to come through the Arifa. To such an extent, and this I discussed with Tzvi on Sunday, it could be, you remember this discussion, Tzvi, that the Arifa is almost like a Maisa Shchita. It's almost like Avos HaKarban. To such an extent that it has to be mina oref, and you need a special kli. You can't just, chop off its head with anything.
And mula oref.
And it's got to be mula oref on the top of the oref. And all this the Gemara derives from mulika v'chatas ha'of, which seems to indicate that the purpose and the goal here is kapara. And if that be the case, then it's like a karban, right? And moreover, it's the arifa itself. In Yiddish, I would say the following, if you know a little Yiddish. Als licht in dem Arifa. Hakol munach ba'arifa. You follow what I mean? Anything else is just to set up the Arifa. We need a Medida, determine the closest city. We need that this Canaan now of that city be morid, the Eglah Arufa down to the Nachal Eson. But now we get to the Kishkis of the mitzvah, and that's Arifa l'shitas harai. However, it seems to me that there might be another way of understanding this right. And Enochinami Medida is a mitzvah, and Horada l'Nachal Eson is a mitzvah. But the Gemara says in Menachos that Ein Mevarchim El Al Gmar mitzvah. Called mitzvah she Gmar mitzvah Mevarchen Aleh, mitzvah shein Gmar mitzvah Ein Mevarchen Aleh. So imagine, and this is my question to you, if there was a Medida and a Horada, and they never did the Arifas Eglah, which could be for 15 different reasons. Was there a kiyum mitzvah? In other words, even if I would tell you that Medida itself should generate a bracha, it's a mitzvah. And even if I would tell you that Horadol and Achal Esau would also be a mitzvah and should generate a bracha. But nevertheless, these are mitzvahs that are only tchilas ha-mitzvah. And at this point, the mitzvah itself is hanging in abeyance. It may reach its fruition, it may not. If it doesn't reach its fruition, like for example, you know that there's a mitzvah to count Shnot HaShmita, right? 7 times. And the Ramban writes that we don't make a bracha on counting the Shnos HaShmit Vayovel. So I heard once from Rav Soloveitchik, he asked, why not? And he answered, because this Gemara Menachos, that the Torah says count the 7 times 7, and then you should be Makadesh the 50th year as Yovel. So the counting of the 7 Shmitos is not the Gemara mitzvah, right? You blow the shofar on the 10th of the month, the month going into the 8th year, and that is considered the Gemara mitzvah. And therefore we don't make a bracha on the count. I once want to suggest, again, you could laugh me out of the ballpark on this, that the reason why a Nido or a Zavah doesn't make a bracha on Sfira Zayin Nikiyim, even though the Torah says V'safra, which is a command, is because the Gemar mitzvah is the Tvila, is the Tara. So that the Zayin Nikiyim and its Sfira is only a beginning of a mitzvah. It might be a mitzvah. Some Sofer wavers back and forth whether she should count Bepeh. Okay, nobody does that, I'm just telling you, but you should know in theory. And here also, the Medida and the Horada are meaningful But that's not the Gemara mitzvah. So now we have to clarify Hakira. Is there a mitzvah medida per se? Is there a mitzvah of Harada per se? Or no? There's one long mitzvah. Like in Taryag mitzvahs, you can only count it as one. And that mitzvah is going to include medida, Harada, and Arifa. And therefore, the bracha will be on the Gemara mitzvah, which is the moment of Arifa. That's the Shitas HaRaiva. So again, the two ways of understanding the Raiva. Either Raiva is holding that medida is only a hechsher mitzvah. And again, it might also tie into what we discussed earlier. Meaning, if medida, like the chizkuni, is part of a whole process of trying to determine who is the rotzeach, then it might be a key of mitzvah unto itself. And if that be the case, it's not a matter of clarification. And even if we didn't have it asli l'machlokes, we still might require a bezdin sheino shakel for the chal shem bezdin. And then bezdin is playing a major role here to fulfill the mitzvah medida. And therefore, if I make a bracha on medida, who's going to make a bracha on the medida? The members of the bezdin agadol. I don't think all five of them or all three of them, but one of them will make the bracha. But now he goes on, he says that there's a sefer called Nachal Esan. If somebody could Google this and tell me who wrote the Nachal Esan, it's a very nice name for a sefer if you're learning the laws of Eglah Arufa. Kosav shemevarcham ala medida. So what does it mean? Is he arguing with the Ravid because he's saying, hey, you made a mistake. Medida is not just a hechsher mitzvah, but it's a mitzvah unto itself. Or is he arguing with the Ravid because the Ravid holds that medida is dependent upon the fruition of the mitzvah, and we only make a bracha on the Gemar mitzvah?
Is that not Rav Kanievsky's book?
Say it again?
Is that not Rav Kanievsky's sefer on Eglah Arufa?
Oh, could be. Could be.
No, he has a sefer on there. It's called.
Could be. This is the Grach. It's a good name for a sefer if you're writing about the Eglah Arufa. B'tzarch bir b'shitas u'b'pashas nomer shamitzvah shel medidi levarer. Oh, he wants to tie it back to whether it's birur or kiyur. If it's only birur, right? So we want to know which is the city that is closest, and therefore the mitzvah will begin once we determine the city. Nimtza shamedida atzma eno chelik me'avas Eglah Arufa. Then he calls it chiyuve bezdin levarer. Okay, fine, but leave out chiyuve bezdin. I think the emphasis here it's only a birur l'dover. It's a matter of clarification. And then Yoni's question is why the Torah put this on the shoulders of bezdin, that they're the ones who will clarify it. What did bezdin take a what is that called, the profession? They actually make a good living. Those guys who Surveyors, excellent. Thank you. I haven't heard that word in about 50 years, so I'm very excited. Okay, surveyors, right? I don't know. Bezdin took a course in being surveyor. It's like I always wondered about the Kohen in Tzaras. Did the Kohen go to medical school? He's going to tell you what this is Tzaras.
It's not medical.
Correct. It's not medical. So he says, "Ukshem shein bracha al bira bezdin b'pidyon hakdeshos." Okay, so now we're learning a little bit about erchin. So you have to always evaluate the value of something for purposes of pidyon, and bezdin has to do that pidyon. So that's only a hechatimtza. It's a bira, and therefore ain't bracha al b'tid. But if on the other hand we hold in the third line here from the top of this paragraph, she mitzvah b'fnei atzma. And it's not just a matter of birur, but bezdin is creating a new entity, a chal shem ir, then they would make a bracha. Okay, now we get to our essay for today. So this you have, I think, in an earlier. Why are you laughing?
Because you're only 40 minutes into this year.
Oh,
We got to today's essay.
For saying that to me, I'm going to punish you. You're going to have to stay an extra hour to hear the whole shir. Okay, I'm just joking. Okay, so this is called Marocha Chaf Beis Seder Arifas HaEglah. So until now we had Havas Eglah Arufa, and we covered the first 2 pages of an 8-page essay, and now we're fast forwarding to a larger essay which goes on and on and on, and that starts on page Ayin Zayin. Okay. So let's see what we have over here. Yesh Lachkor. Let me just see where he has the Yesh Lachkor. Okay, so we're on page Ayin Ches. And okay. He calls it Yesh Levarer. So do you have this Ayin Ches on the left column, a paragraph that starts Ukidei? Okay. He says, Miu HaMechuyev Ba'avos HaEglah. Upon whom does the chiyuv fall of Havas HaEglah? Ha'im zu chovas hatzibur or chovas habezdin? So now I have to tell you, Rabbosai, and you could take it or leave it, that the language here is misleading, according to the way I was taught. You follow what I'm saying? So, as we spoke before about communication skills, right? So in my communication skills, the phrase here, chovas hatzibur, is way off the mark. Because on the contrary, the second side, which is called chovas habezdin, that's called the chovas hatzibur. Do you follow?
As representatives of the people.
Excellent. The other side of the chakira should not be chovas hatzibur, but rather chovas kol yochid v'yochid. And Rav Soloveitchik on many, many occasions used to drill it into us that a tzibur is not the sum total of individuals, right? You count up how many people.
It's a different entity.
It's a new entity, a new enterprise. That's why he couldn't become chief rabbi of Israel, because he could not rely on the heter mechira of Shemitah. In those days, you couldn't be chief rabbi of Israel and not rely on heter mechira. And the reason he didn't rely on heter mechira is because he felt that it's not that you, me, him, and every last member of the people of Israel own Eretz Yisrael and they could sell it. But rather, there's a new entity called the Tzibur, which spans all the generations, and they own Eretz Yisrael, and that can't be sold. So there's no such thing as Mechiras Eretz Yisrael, which here in Efrat is a problem for me, so I got to go all the way to Beitar to get my fruits and vegetables. Okay, now it's only fruits, it's not vegetables. All right. Anyway, so getting back to our subject here, we said that the purpose and the goal of the mitzvah of Arufa is kapara. And if that be the case, who needs kapara? And the two ways of learning that. It could be that every member of the city somehow, either actively or more likely passively, contributed to the ultimate death of this person. What does that mean? It's my responsibility as a member of the city to see to it that a person who comes here and he travels through the city and then he leaves the city shouldn't be left on his own drugs, because if he's left, he might get murdered. How does he get murdered? So, for example, he has no money, he has no food, he runs out of rations, he has no water, he starts stopping people and attacking them, and then they kill him, and so forth and so on. But you'll ask me, Rabbi Berzon, come on, give it a break. You're telling me that every member of the city needs kapara? In Hebrew, Ech ze bali de bitui. Show me in halacha a little bit of a remez that every member of the city is possibly guilty and needs the kapara of the. Otherwise, I'm going to say that it's a chovas ha'ir, and we have many mitzvahs that are chovas ha'ir, like, for example, here in idachas. So when you have a chovas ha'ir, that's called a chovas tzibur. Who represents the tzibur? Tzvi Bezdin. So when we say it's a chovas Bezdin, what we're meaning is it's a chova on the tzibur. Like for
Bezdin or Ziknei Ha'ir.
I don't know. That's a bit of a stretch because Ziknei Ha'ir, they don't have any chalushem.
They're actually the ones who would be responsible.
But the question that I'm asking you is there any halacha at all of Ziknei Ha'ir? I need a precedent. It says by Boaz that he gathered together the Ziknei Ha'ir to be Mora Hora of Moavi v'lo Moavis. But even in that pasuk in Sefer Rus, I believe that we're talking about the Bezdin of the city, not the Ziknei Ha'ir, anybody who has a white beard. You know what I'm saying? So therefore, I need to find some egg to hang my hat on to prove to you that every member of the city is part of the Eglah Arufa. And it's not just the city as an ear, which is a tzibur represented by this. Like, for example, before I told you the Ramban says there's no bracha on counting Shemitah, right? Why? Because it's not a Gemara mitzvah until they sanctify the 15th year. But those Rishonim who would have a bracha, who would make the bracha? It's a Chovas Tzibur. And once again, it would be the best representing the Tzibur that would make the bracha. So I think I found something here after I went fishing. Let's see now if I could find it. Okay. Here. Just help me find, if you can, the Rambam in this paragraph. Just 1 second. Oh, here's the question: who has to pay for the Eglah Arufa? Are you with me, Rabosai? Mm-hmm. Out of whose pocket, whose bank account is the money to buy the Eglah? So, for example, in Karbanos, we have Karbanos Yachid and Karbanos Tzibur. So if it's a Karban Yachid, I'm bringing, let's say, a Karban Ola, I got to pay from my pocket for the animal. Mm-hmm. If, on the other hand, it's a Karban Tzibur, we take the money from the Lishkas, from the Trumas HaLishka, correct? Because the Trumas HaLishka is Momen Shalat Tzibur. Not you, me, and him, but the entire Tzibur as one entity. And the Rambam says in Perek Yud Milchus Sotah, "Kofin es anshe ir lahavi Eglah Arufa." We could force the people and compel them to chip in for the Eglah Arufa. And if you take a look at a paragraph that starts with BIyun, if you see such a paragraph, he says that on Chovas Yachid, sheyesh lo kapara, ain't sibolis arev lachufa. He says the following, that there's a rule of thumb that in Karbanos, let's say, for example, chas v'sholom, you violate Shabbos b'shogeg, and you chayv what? A Karban Chatos. We don't force you to buy the Karban Chatos. Why? Because you need that kapara. L'rtzonchem tizbachu. And therefore you have to be motivated on your own. But again, the only havamina that we could force you to pay for the Karban in a case of a Chovas Yachid is because it's your personal obligation. Like I have to buy a lulav if I don't own a lulav. He says that in Kachim, or for that matter, whenever there's a kapara at the ultimate goal, then we lift the halacha that normally applies of kfir, but only because of the separate halacha of kapara. Otherwise, that as a Chovas Yachid, we would force you to come up with the money. And who are we forcing? Every last member of the city. So who needs kapara here? Every Yachid in the city. Now, let's fast forward to page Ayin Tes. He has here a Rambam that is very, very strange in the light of Sotah, in the Masechet Sotah. Let me just see if I can find the Rambam for you. 1 second, sorry. There's so many pages. No, it's a Rambam about. Oh, here it is. Pei Aleph. Do you have page Pei Aleph? I think it's included in the photocopies. Am I right?
Yeah.
Oh, top of Pei Aleph. No, the very top line on the left column. Ma'aseh Korbanos Perek Aleph Halacha Yud Aleph. The Rambam says, Hagedolim b'bakar ad shalosh shanim shlemus. In bakar, when you bring bakar on the mizbeach, the Rambam tells us that the oldest age for the bakar to be royal mizbeach is 3 years old. Yes, Alzeh. If it's more than 3 years old, harehu zaked the ein makrivin also. Now, Rabbosai, take for a minute a Gemara here. I think it's on Daf Memhei. Where is it that says Ein Shonim Poseles Memhei Amid Beis? Is it? Okay. So I'm just going to say over the Gemara about Pen, you'll find the Gemara for me inside, okay? The Gemara says the following, that Avoda Poselis Begla Arufa. And the Gemara wants to derive that in Kodshim, for the Mizbeach, Avoda should be a Poselis. And the Gemara therefore applies a Kalvachom. And there's a Chumrah in Eglah Arufa that doesn't have a parallel in Kodshim. And that is that Shonim Poslos be'Eglah, the Ein Shonim Poslos be'Kodshim. Do you have it? Mm-hmm. What daf is it? Memhei? Memvav. Oh, okay. So you see, I was off by a daf. Okay. There's so many blot here on Eglah Roof. Okay. So let's turn to Memvav Amanal, just that you don't suspect me of creating a Gemara that doesn't exist. And how far down is it from the
There's a full long secretary version.
Memvav Amid Aleph? I would say it's about midway through the daf. I'll read to you the daf. The Gemara says, Male Eglah shekain shonim poslos ba. Meaning that you wanted to set up a kalvachomer that mum is not a posel in Eglah Rufa where it is in Kodshim. So therefore, if avoda is a psul in Eglah Rufa, and Eglah Rufa is kal vis-a-vis Kodshim because there's no psul of mum, then how much more so should avoda be a poselis in Kodshim? And Gemara says, no, I'm going to prove to the opposite, that the Torah is more machmir in Eglah Rufa than it is in Kodshim. Why? Because Eglah shonim poslos ba. Whereas Kodshim ain't shonim poslos ba, with the exception of a Korban Pesach and a Korban Chatas. So now take a look at the Rambam. Guess what? The Rambam says there is a psul of shonim in Kodshim, because the Rambam says you have a bakar that's more than 3 years old. It's a zaken ve'ein makrivin also.
That's just bakar though?
This is the kash of the Mishnah. What?
That's just bakar though. You don't have that.
Okay. Right now, I'm sorry. You know, there's just so much I can accomplish. But you know, you'll take a look here. But in any event, there is a halachin of shonim in Kodshim. So this is the kash of the Mishnah Mel. Do you see that? The bottom 2 lines on the right column. Ubazei Yisashev. He says Hiksha Bishla Melech. I should have read this before. Sheina shonim posel Kodshim. Now, to answer this question, I'm going to suggest the following. The Karen Ora points out, based on a Gemara in Chulin on Daf Yud Aleph, which you'll see on the top of Ayin Tes. You see that Gemara in Chulin? That a treifa is possible in Eglah Arufa. Correct the Karen Ora, I don't get it. there's no psul mum in Eglah Rufa. So how could there be a psul of treif? Remember this tweet?
Yeah, I remember the kilo said it's a treif doesn't exist.
I don't know exactly what he means, although he's a gadol
It's a Bakhtala. It's as if
not a
it's
law.
there.
Okay,
That's right.
fine. So the Karen Orah goes in a different direction. Okay. There are certain psulim that are unique to Kudsh. And Eglah Rufa does not share those psulim. But there's another category of psulim that goes way beyond the strict, restricted area of Kudshim, and those could apply to Eglah Rufa. And Treifa is an example. Why? Because Treifa is a halacha, to use the language of the Karen Orah, of heder shlemus. And that halacha of heder shlemus is not to be identified as a psul mum. So a psul mum would mean that the animal is considered shlema, but it's got a mum. You know, you make a, like the Gemara, make a slice under to the ilam, right? So that's halach in Kodshim. And Treifa could actually be a brand new category that may apply to Kodshim as well, but not because of Kodshim, but because of a universal halacha, which you might call a din klali, of heder shlemus. Like I gave the example of a lulav hayavesh. Rashi says lulav hayavesh is lacking in an element of zeh kelim yaveyu, and therefore it's possible. So you see that there's halacha psul of heder shlemus. You can't say that a lulav hayavesh is shalem. Oh, now herein lies the difference between the psul of shanim with regard to Eglah Rufa and the psul of shanim with regard to Kodshim, according to the Rambam in Perek Aleph Milchus Ma'aseh Korbanos. When the Rambam speaks about Gedolim ad shalosh shanim shlemos, yeser al keinu zaken ve'ein makriven also, that is a specific halach in Kodshim. It has no parallel at all in Eglah Rufa. Eglah Rufa, on the other hand, has a specific din of shanim. And that din of shanim reflects the fact that the Torah wants a certain kind of shlemus, but it's not midin mum. The psul of shanim is a separate halach in Eglah Rufa. The Torah says that which Eglah could, through its Arufa, achieve and accomplish the kapara, it's got to be an Eglah that's 1 year old or 2 years old, whatever the age might be, right? Machlokas Tanam. So he writes the following. Lefi divrei HaKaren Orah yesh l'chalik. You have it on Pei Aleph, the paragraph that starts Ava. Yeshnei sugei psul b'shanim v'zaken. In other words, we should not identify shanim and zaken, because shanim is a psul in Eglah Rufa and zaken is a psul in Mizbeach. Hapsul b'shanim mitzad zikna, hu psul be, I wanted to add the word kodshim, of hakrevu no lefechasecha, that the Torah says that you need a certain a certain beauty for the Mizbeach. Aval mitzad shir hashanim hu kosher lechalutin. Shir shanim sets up a certain shir, and that shir is a special halacha in Eglah Rufa that has no parallel in Kodshim, but in Kodshim is halacha of hakrevi no lefechasecha, so that the psul of zaken in the Rambam is a bezunder psul that only applies to Kodshim. On the other hand, the psul of shanim is a bezunder psul that only applies in Eglah Rufa. In Paradua, for example, yesh ba psul shel shir. Why? Because we need bas shonim ka'ela. Lefi zeh, misyashev heitev hapircha male egla shehashonim poslim ba. Tomer b'kodshim shein hashonim poslim ba. Hainu sheklapei psul shematzinu be'egla. That's a separate psul of shonim, which only applies to egla. But in kodshim we don't have a psul of shonim. The psul of zaken is a different kind of psul of hakrevi no lefechasech. So I thought that perhaps we could use this to explain the case of treifa, right? If you go back to Ayin Tes, for example, the Gemara in Chulin on the top of Ayin Tes on the left column establishes that Eglah Arufa ain't a karman, and yet the Gemara derives a psul of treifa in Eglah Arufa from kapara kikarman. So Rashi says that the Gemara doesn't mean to equate Eglah Arufa with kodshim. For sure, they're not the same. There's a psul of mum and kodshim that doesn't have any parallel in Eglah Arufa. But the Gemara wants to say that it's a separate limud. In other words, there's a hekesh between kodshim and Eglah Arufa, which is called kapara kikodshim, and that hekesh teaches me that the same din applies, but for two different reasons. So the din of treifa, which is derived as a psul in Eglah Arufa from karbanos, is not the same psul of karbanos. It's a separate psul of treifa. We derive it from karbanos. So the psul here is a psul midin Eglah Arufa, but not midin kodshim. That's what Rashi says. And therefore the Iser Hana in Eglah Arufa, says Rashi, which is again derived from kodshim, because kodshim is hegdesh and tzosar hana, ad kedei kach that there's a shita of Rishonim in the name of the Tosi Yishonim that there's me'ila in Eglah Arufa. So Rashi says that's not midin kodshim. There's an Iser Hana that we derive from kodshim. And in Hilchas Yalfusos, we can derive through the principle of kapara kikodshim that certain dinim in kodshim will apply to Eglah Arufa, like the Iser Hana. But the Oser Hana is not kodshim. There's no shame kodesh, according to Rashi, in the Eglah Arufa. And therefore Rashi would reject the Tosi Shonim who establishes Me'ila, because Me'ila means that there's Hegdesh. And you're stealing from Hegdesh, but there's no Hegdesh in Eglah Arufa, according to Rashi. So that the Iser Hana in Eglah Arufa is a separate din in Eglah Arufa, that Eglah Arufa is Asur B'Hana. Okay, then we'll stop here. So again, I just hope that, we covered a lot of different topics tonight, whether it's today, I should say, but it feels like night, but whether or not there are three different mitzvahs, and whether or not it's birur or kiyum, whether or not it's a kapara on the tzibur as a tzibur, a kapara on each yachid, and we discussed the issue of whether or not Eglah Arufa shares the psulim of kodshim b'toras kodshim, or it's a separate din of Eglah Arufa. Okay then? Legabi shonim, legabi the Iser Hana, legabi the psul of treifa, legabi the Iser Me'ila, and so on. Okay then?
Wow.
All right.
Thank you.
So what's today? Today is Tuesday. So we should be able to get together next week, right?
Well,
It's
you
a
know,
show.
it's
Okay.
the
Great. When is Yontif? On Thursday or Friday?
Friday's okay.
Friday. Oh yeah, I will be.